This is the Graceful Atheist Podcast. Welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast. My name is David, and I am trying to be the Graceful Atheist. Please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on podchaser.com and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Special thanks to Mike T for editing today's episode. One of the 2021 improvements that I've tried to make with the podcast is finally using my domain, gracefulatheist.com. There you can find full show notes for each episode, including a lot more links and content. There you can also find the deconversion how-to, which is really the work that I think is the most important thing I've ever written, that goes through the stages that a person goes through and that kind of the emotion and the feeling of that process. I encourage you to check that out. Also on the site, I've got links to a number of books that I recommend, and you can support the show by clicking on those links, buying those books, and a little bit will go to the show. That is gracefulatheist.com. On to today's show. My guest today is Troy Moore Hart. Troy is one of those guests who is pointed in the same direction that I am. The idea of secular grace and humanism is important to Troy. Troy calls himself a progressive secular humanist. He's concerned with restorative justice. He is working on becoming a secular humanist celebrant. He has concerns around the LGBTQ community and participates in the Southern Poverty Law Center's Y'all Means Y'all program. And in fact, we'll have links in the show notes where you can sign the pledge to support LGBTQ people in the southern and rural parts of the country. We talk about the Trevor Project. We talk about the Religious Trauma Institute. We talk about the American Humanist Association. I love the fact that Troy brings up these topics and is a huge proponent of all of those endeavors. Troy's story is also heartbreaking. He grew up in an evangelical home. He experienced some religious trauma. When he told his family that he was gay and came out, there are still lasting reverberations from that conversation that you will hear. This is summed up in a statement that Troy wanted me to add. In his own words, quote, "It's hard to be in relationships with people who think you are going to hell," end quote. And then he goes on to say, and I'm paraphrasing here, that sums up the relationship that he has with his family and why he has had to come up with boundaries in those relationships. I imagine that there are many of you out there who can relate. I do want to note here that I commend Troy for stopping us and setting up a boundary in this conversation. Troy specifically asked that we keep that part in to show that it's natural in a conversation to come to a point where you need to say, that's as far as I am willing to go. And Troy demonstrates how to do that gracefully and in a wonderful way. I loved this conversation. I think Troy is such a good representative of secular humanism. Troy did hear this conversation earlier and was a bit critical of himself. He wanted you to know, the listener, that he was a bit nervous and he didn't love some of his responses. I have put in a few edits at his request. I want you to know that I think it was wonderful and that Troy has done an amazing job representing himself, representing secular humanism, and I'm excited to share it with you. Here's my conversation with Troy Moore Hart. Troy Moore Hart, welcome to the Graceful Atheist Podcast.
Thank you. I'm really excited. I'm really excited for our conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for reaching out to me. I think one of the most rewarding parts of doing the podcast is that people that listen to the podcast and then they say to themselves, I really want to tell my story too. So Thank you for reaching out. And I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So let's start by just introductions. Like, what was your faith tradition growing up? And we'll get to how we got to now.
Yeah. So my name's Troy Moore Hart. Very excited to be here. Very excited just to take a second to say thank you so much, David, for the work that you do. and all the interviews that you're putting together and stories and messages you're amplifying. I think that you're working some very powerful, beautiful healing magic, and very honored and grateful to get to be a part of this. And I'm very excited to share my story.
Well, that's much appreciated. I think the guests are what make the show work.
So let's see. So my story kind of begins with my parents, I suppose. My parents grew up about a mile apart from each other down a county dirt road in tiny town, Texas.
Okay.
And by the time my mom was 18, I was born. And then parents were from sort of a Southern Baptist and extended similar theological backgrounds there.
Okay.
And so, yeah, by the time I'm 5, we're a family of 6 at that point. And
wow,
my parents are separated for that time being.
Okay.
And my dad is working as a logger. And my dad has a chainsaw accident.
Oh, man.
Yeah, he cut the toes off of his right foot. Chainsaw went through the steel toe boot, and real.
Wow.
Right, for the listeners, I should have gave a warning for that. A little graphic, but
yeah.
So he felt that was God trying to get his attention, to tell him, because my dad felt like the black sheep of his family, and a lot of that, and he experienced a bit of heaviness as well. But so he felt God was trying to get his attention, telling him to go into the ministry, to be a preacher, to spread the good news, to evangelize, all of that. He was raised in a very born again, believing family. And so he became a pastor, went to seminary, went to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth.
Okay.
So we lived there for a bit. And during that time, my dad feels that he is being called to work as a missionary in Alaska. So my family lived in Alaska in a remote island in Alaska.
Oh, wow.
A little bit of my childhood, where my parents worked as missionaries. But eventually the relationship with the church leadership there soured. And so sort of throughout the rest of my childhood into my adulthood, my dad had periods of working as a pastor, and then kind of reaching a disenchantment and sort of a jadedness and a frustration with church politics,
sure,
things of that nature. He really had a heart for helping people, and really cared about that aspect. And I think that some of the dogma and doctrine really stepped on his heartstrings a bit there, and some other stuff.
I think that's very true. That the people who, in general, the people who become pastors do genuinely care about people, and they're trying to do the right thing. Sometimes they make terrible, terrible mistakes, but for the most part, they're trying to. And the system of church, and I mean just the big church, right, can grind a person down and just tear out that caring out of a person.
Yeah. I would say my dad kept his caring. It just ran through some lenses and some pre-recorded scripts that he inherited, that just, it's hard to come to different conclusions within those, sometimes because of how they're built and maintained and sustained and stuff.
Yeah.
So I Southern Baptist preacher's kid, son of a preacher man here.
Yeah. Yeah.
When my family, when I was in middle and high school, like a lot of people, I start to really think more intentionally and reflect on my beliefs, my ideas, my identity, and a number of the questions that I'd always kind of had about my faith, about our faith, community faith of origin, and all that, really started to get amplified during that time of my life. And I'm going to church, my family's going to church, I'm going to youth group and going on the trips, and we're very invested.
Right.
I was a true believing, born again Christian. I got saved when I was 6 at a mega church, and baptized by my dad at my mama's church. And true believing Christian, and starting to really grapple with the heavy questions that I just don't feel like I ever got good answers to.
Right.
And always left, the curiosity wasn't really sated, the need for good answers to really troubling questions about a number of the things that I was being taught. They really became more important, and a deeper sense of urgency to kind of address them.
Right.
And all of that, sort of layered, just another layer being, during that time I start to really understand and discover a budding queerness within me. And so then the stakes are just really amplified to have solid answers to these really heavy, challenging questions I've had throughout my life. And I enter into about a 2-year period of just like a very like earnest, eager attempt to pray my gay away. Honestly, like a really heavy time, like contemplating suicide.
Oh man.
And as I say that, like anyone who may be listening, there's so many resources, and maybe David, you can link up to some for this episode, the Trevor Project and others. There are times when I would have benefited from calling and seeking resources and help. And I'm glad that they're available much more widely at this point in time.
Yeah. I'm curious. I've had a lot of gay people on the show that tell the story and like the difficulty of that. Just, you're discovering yourself, period. Right.
Yeah.
And then you're in an environment in which the dogma says that who you are isn't right in some way. Was there an extra layer of also being the pastor's kid? Did you feel an obligation?
So by that time, my dad was not working as a pastor.
Okay.
One of the times we lived in Alaska, moved to Alaska, my dad had taken secular jobs. He had discovered working like selling cars, and he really enjoyed that. Like,
okay.
If anybody's seen Boy Erased, that movie felt so real when I was watching it because of the whole pastor, car salesman dad, and struggling with the son's queerness. And it was very real. But yeah, so, I had a little bit of a buffer, and my dad was also working like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off at an oil field job. So there's a little bit of respite there. That was a very hard relationship in my life. So there wasn't quite the same intensity that maybe would have been prevalent if we were still, like with him being my pastor and small church environment and stuff. Had a little bit more freedom, thankfully.
Okay.
Yeah, though, I fervently believed I was going to hell. And that, sort of was like, I guess, the last straw that sort of pushed me to really deeply examine my faith and really start to deconstruct it and be like, this can't be true. Like I've poured my heart into begging for exoneration, forgiveness, all of this sort of stuff that I had, internalized from the external messaging that I needed to do. Like if you were someone in that situation, like you better figure it out because you're going to hell, like very literally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is important too, that it's because you are taking it seriously, there's a problem.
Right, exactly. You got to really, really seriously examine it. And not everyone maybe will find themselves in the situation at a younger age to try to deeply audit their ideas and belief system that they were born into and taught. But for me, it was literally life and death, and not just temporal life and death, but I was looking down the barrel of the prospect of a permanent, horrible, painful torture. I'm from a very spiritual warfare, prayer warrior background family and mom. And it was terrifying.
I can only imagine.
I was just petrified, not just when I started to understand my queerness. These ideas were terrifying me at a very young age. There were nights when I was a kid, when my dad was a pastor, where I would be so scared to just sleep for just these ideas and all the images. Like I would literally go into the hallway and just wedge myself as close as I could under the little crack below the door, trying to get as close to my mom as I could, because I was just terrified.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I was a really sensitive kid. I'm a fairly emotionally in tune person, I think. And a lot of these things really upset me.
Yeah.
And so by the time I'm, in high school and really understanding, like, Troy, you are gay. Like, you are a queer person. You cannot change this. You have tried, you have prayed your heart out, nothing's budging. Like, so there was a period where I was like angry at God. And there's a lot of people that go through that sort of unpacking, processing and dealing with stuff.
Sure.
So like mad at God and thought God's just some horrible, mean person. Like I'm much kinder and better than God,
Right.
And I was like that version of God that had lived in my mind, that had, it's a human construct, but that idea had lived in my mind.
Yeah.
I was like a million times more moral and compassionate and forgiving and empathetic than the God of the Bible.
Right.
And so, started to deconstruct. And I sort of, by the end of high school and into college, I had sort of arrived at feeling comfortable saying I was agnostic.
Okay.
Because to me, I think on a certain level, it was like an intuitive big tent umbrella that could put me like still within some in-group with my family, with like everyone I had known growing up.
Right.
There was a bridge between a possibility of belief connecting with a specific belief, but there was some amount of Venn diagram there.
Sure. Yes. Let's make clear too that I think a genuine agnostic is a perfectly valid place to be, right?
Much love and empathy, encouragement, like not looking to throw the agnostics under the bus. Love them.
Yeah.
Everybody's welcome to the party. Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to say, from the podcast point of view, we're also really happy with people who identify as being agnostic. It's, it's a very honest and humble position to take. So,
yeah. And there's elements of that still, I would say, are a part of my like progressive humanist identity and approach and views and values. And we can get to that. I'm so excited to talk about humanism. Yes. I love the episodes of the podcast when you have humanists or folks, working in the arena who, I can tell you get excited. So I'm excited to get to talk with an excited David about humanism and ideas.
Excellent. Yeah.
But yeah, so I started identifying as agnostic, and that's comfortable. That allows some connection still, because I think I was intuitively terrified to lose my family. And, atheist growing up, it just talked about in such like atheist and abortion, the two A words,
right? All
evangelical fundamentalists would just immediately see red.
Yeah.
And so like that just wasn't possible. And, that's sort of in order to stay in it, you have to figure out creative ways to remain and to sustain yourself in it. And
yeah,
I think there was an element of that informed my agnostic identity. And that's my story. That's not everyone's story, but that's certainly true from my story.
Sure.
My experience. So for about the next 15 years, I'm agnostic. It's not terribly important to me.
Right.
What was much more important to me was just not being wrapped up in organized, dogmatic, making some sort of specific claims that just seemed bogus and impossible to substantiate or believe in to me. But then I get married a couple of years ago. I have a wonderful, handsome, lovely husband that I'm very proud to get to be partnered with.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
We have a wonderful, fun wedding. And then after that, a lot of my like sort of unacknowledged, unresolved, unprocessed, unphysically digested pain, trauma, religious, doctrinal, like, fear of hell and these sorts of things, it really sifted up to the surface in me. And I went through a sort of like a Renaissance healing, reflection, growth, auditing, integration, sort of cocoon butterfly, like back and forth kind of a thing.
Okay.
I would say like and it's been a process of moving from the rawness of it all, once it's sifted up, to moving it from raw and trying to refine it. So It's been I would say I've been going through a bit of a refinement process in many different ways. And certainly with deconstruction, but also with like a healing faith journey. And for me, those were like very much so in tandem.
Right.
And perhaps for others, there's like different, maybe it's parsed out. Maybe there, you have like different levels of things that you're deconstructing. For me, I think I had to deconstruct the internalized like anti-queer shame.
Yeah.
And then from there, I was free to internalize the like remnants of the deep early programming that I received as a little kid, and some of the kind of intense fundamentalist, religious supremacist, like evangelical ideologies. And all the while, like a healing was going through and all of that. And it's just been a tremendously wonderful process. And through that, I have, discovered and come across humanism. And I was like, oh, wow, like, holy shit. Oh, sorry, I don't know if I can say that.
You can totally say that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just like, this is amazing. Like, this is it. Like, I found it. I have been searching for so long, and I finally found my like ideological, moral home.
Yeah.
Because for me, I think, and I've certainly heard you talk on your show about like not your words, these are my words, but a sort of like an impatience, a frustration with some of the more like a stereotypical aggressive, angry atheist.
Yeah, strident debate culture atheist. Yeah, no, I'm very much strongly against that, and say it directly. So
yeah, so I think for me, while I will say, and I'd like to get back to it at some point, I am an apologist for the angry atheists. Because I think that that's like an important part of a healing process. And a lot of people have been traumatized. And I think to tell them that they can't or shouldn't be angry stifles their healing. I think that they're trying to figure out how to express and work through and acknowledge and fairly, give space to those feelings. And there's room for improvement. And so much of this is there's just not been community support for this kind of intentional healing. And like, and like group encouragement, but we're getting into that right now. And I mean, in your podcast is such an important part of that. And anyway, so I'm excited to talk more about all.
Let's just pause here and talk about that for a second. I do think that I needed to learn that. If you've listened before, you've probably heard me say, because I came to Christianity in my teens and I already kind of had a sense of self.
Yeah.
Some of the really deep hurts that I hear from people who grew up as children, like you're describing, just wanting to be close to your mom because you're terrified.
Yeah.
I did not experience those things. And so I've had to learn that the anger that people experience when they come out of kind of this religious stricture is healthy. It's healthy, and it's something that needs to happen. I'll just refer back briefly to the episode with Brian Peck.
Yeah.
He really pushed me hard on that to say, no, anger is a good thing. And so I agree with you. I'm learning as well. So
yeah. I feel funny with words like sacred, but if I were super comfortable with it, I would say that, you know, some of the anger that is in atheists or people who have been atheists and or people who have been harmed by religion and or ex-Christians, you know, all this ex-religious people, I just think that it's been fairly accumulated in an equal and opposite reaction sort of way. And so many of these communities don't really teach or allow people to express frustration. So then it's very like accumulated and compounded and deeply embodied.
Right.
And it can be very volcanic and explosive. And so I'm glad that there are things like your podcast and the Religious Trauma Institute and the Reclamation Collective and so many different groups and efforts and accounts that are looking to stabilize folks as we go through those parts of our process, because it is very important and necessary. And also got to be careful so you don't harm people.
Yeah, I think this was my initial message. It's that there is a tendency, especially when you kind of cross that Rubicon, right? You decide, you know what, I no longer believe. And in fact, I can now see the manipulation. I can see
and you have this
the abuse,
excitement to launch you.
Exactly. And you've got all this new information. You've been reading books and listening to podcasts, and there is a tendency to burn the bridge and walk away in a blaze of glory. And it's that I'm trying to just recommend people hold back just a little. You might actually care about some of the relationships with people.
Yeah,
definitely. If there was abuse involved, you need to be able to walk away. You get safe, you get 100%. Away.
Whenever there's trauma and abuse, you triage that and you prioritize and center the people experiencing that and the survivors of that. And then but from there, like everyone's humanity ideal, you know, it needs to be considered. And I'm a strong proponent of transformative justice, and that, you know, people do change. I have seen so many people and stories and lived experiences. People change, and it can take a long time, and it can take only a few conversations. Like, you know, there's all different ways, but so
I think just to insert myself in the story here for a little bit, I think the thing that's obsessing me right now is that due to politics, due to religion in the Western world right now, we can't even talk to one another. Even to suggest that maybe we should try to reach out to the people on the other side can be seen as betrayal of your side. That is like the thing that's obsessing me. Like, if we're constantly just attacking one another, we will never be able to bridge those gaps. And like you say, sometimes just a few conversations can bring somebody closer to you.
Yeah.
And so just, you know, having a conversation in which you are not attacking, that doesn't mean you're not speaking truth. It just means you're not attacking. And I agree. I understand. That is really hard to do.
I think there needs to be a certain bandwidth of forgiveness and like a deep, very palpable, warm empathy and compassion for folks as we, as non-believers, ex-believers, etc., are asked to have empathy and grace towards those that we feel frustrated with or hurt by who are believers. I think that it's at least equally as valid and fair to ask for that in return for people who are processing stuff for the first time, as, you know, as adults, as teenagers, as, you know, people at various ages with a lot of accumulated experiences. And I don't think we disagree. I think we're vehemently agreeing. Stand and a greater comprehensive, more holistic understanding. And all of that is being built in real time. This conversation is so alive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So I feel like I've interrupted you just a little bit. Let's go back just a smidge. It sounds like you went from agnostic to kind of discovering secular humanism, and that really felt like it fit for you. What are some of the elements there that really resonated with you?
So yeah, honestly, like it was the greatest aha. Like I had been searching for a long time, and like, yeah, even as sort of like when I wasn't a believer anymore, I would try out different churches.
Yeah.
Or, like in college, I started a program where I would take students to different houses of worship for other people and to allow access and greater multicultural understanding, but also for myself to try to be like, does any of this, like I'm trying it on like a new jacket, like, does this fit? Like,
right.
Nothing ever fit. Nothing ever fit.
Yeah.
Some things fit better than others, but nothing.
Sure.
Really,
yeah.
Like nothing was ever really adult size. I was like try and, oh, that sounds infantile. I'm not trying to make an infantile reference there. I apologize. It's not my intention.
Well, to go back to something you said earlier,
Mm-hmm.
you were asking deep questions in your teens.
Yeah.
It's not that there are no answers. It's that the answers aren't satisfying.
Right. Yeah. So for me, I think some of the stuff about humanism that really, really just felt like the deep, like that ping moment when everything comes together and you're like, oh,
yes.
Which is the idea of, we don't need to believe in any supernatural deity or God or interventionist, all-powerful, etc. being to believe that we must be kind and moral.
Right.
That there is only so many resources to go around, that to have an exercise of humility, which is one of the 10 commitments of humanism, which
That's
I
right.
greatly support and try to amplify, just to sort of admit like what we don't know and work from there and admit that, just to look around the room and be like, all right, we have all different sorts of people and groups of folks with different beliefs and backgrounds and traditions. And, we can't harm these people. We don't want to be harmed, but we also can't harm them. So we need to figure out like a sort of genuine pluralism. And the reality is there, like humanity is not there yet. We still have not arrived at pluralism, not truly.
Right.
I think that is a very great test that we are undergoing, and we're experiencing significant growing pains in that process, and like a hyper deconstruction by a chunk of humanity, not just religious ideas, but also especially religious ideas.
Right.
Yeah. So humanism, I mean, the idea that not just you don't believe in God, but what do you believe in? What do you support? What do you value? What do you want to see happen?
Right.
If you think something is wrong or that something is harmful or there's an injustice, like how do we fix it? What actions can we take together to be a part of that? And I see humanism as like a positive affirmation, as opposed to atheism, which is a negation of something, which all of it is very valid. And yeah.
It's just the answer to one question.
Yeah.
It's not something you can base a life philosophy on.
Yeah. For me, it's like you build something onto or around that or in addition to that. And so for me, like it's important and I think fair to reject what I was taught, because I just don't see how I see it as very harmful and also not true, not based on facts and evidence. But yeah, humanism for me says I care. Humanism to me says, okay, I see your pain, I see your life, I see your reality, and I am going to bend to meet compromise to the extent that it is possible. I am going to stand firm in solidarity where it's very important to have boundaries and to say no to harm. I mean, I think part of what we're experiencing right now in the world is sort of like as humanity becomes more collectively self-aware, and things like smartphones and internet, that's a rapidly increasing endeavor. As we become more self-aware and we sort of learn like a greater me too of different ways in which our ideas and our actions have been harming ourselves and each other. We're going through this auditing process and angling towards inclusion, empathy, and things of that nature, justice. But like, so humanism to me, it just says, I see it, it's important, I value it, and I'm going to be involved in addressing it. I'm going to be involved in resolving these conflicts, in helping encourage healing for these traumas. We are going to promote and like create holistic, comprehensive, trauma-informed approach to this by working together, by listening to each other, by being humble enough to, set our egos aside for a second, when they're bruised, and be willing to consider other points of view that feel perhaps antagonistic.
One other element that I think is really important is many, not, I won't say all, religions deny one's humanity, right? Deny your sexuality, deny your attachment, deny this, deny that.
Yeah.
I think what's really freeing about this idea of humanism is that it is the thriving of being a human being, of accepting oneself, accepting someone else, being in relation with someone else. And it is in no way a Pollyannish, everyone is going to be good and everything's going to be perfect. It acknowledges that we make terrible, terrible errors.
Yeah, that we're responsible, that, not just like there is no God, so we don't have any responsibility. It's like, no, there is no God. And because of that, we have even more responsibility.
Absolutely.
Because we have to determine morality together, which I know is terrifying, like relativism. That's, I don't know, talking points from the 80s and 90s of the rise of the religious right and evangelicalism and stuff. But
yeah, I think we got stuck on the justification for morality, right? So the religious apologists will come along and they'll say, well, without God, you can't be moral. And for us, we're saying,
clearly we can.
Clearly. But not only, I go a step further. It's not just that I build my morals based on the relationships with people. I'm saying the religious person is too, right? They are not living a one-to-one relationship to biblical morality. Right. You'd be arrested if you did that.
Oh yeah. So violent.
Yes, exactly. And so it's more an acknowledgement. It's more a saying, we don't have an objective morality that we can judge against. And due to that fact, we have to work together to figure it out.
Thankfully, we do have empathy, and we're very social animals. Like we want to be together. And so, thankfully, we may not have some of that stuff, but we have a love and a concern for each other. And I think that that's certainly an element that is missing when it comes to, like, for example, when I was growing up, the word atheism conjured, you just think like gray, bland, godless, lifeless, joyless, like baby murdering, like heathen, or, just like an evil person. Yeah. And anyway, just want to acknowledge that image, but to me, there's just like a warmth and a desire to connect and to like really embrace the best in us and to really foster that and to acknowledge and own the limitations and some of the ways in which, we can be dangerous, we can harm ourselves and each other. Like the 10 commitments, the humanist 10 commitments, I see as a sort of like a nice and encouragement guideline, like a good reminder, just like this is, we know that humans are like this, and because of that, we need to be mindful of this, and we can do this together. Like, this is fun. It doesn't have to. I don't. It just seems like it for me. It just feels so common sense, but I know that is not how everyone feels. So,
I think for me, it's something you referenced earlier of just the honesty. Honesty has always been a ground floor value for me. Yeah. I don't know that everyone feels it that way, right? I feel it at the core of my being. I cannot be dishonest. And I think part of the cognitive dissonance of religion was saying that you believe these things that have no evidence, that like the deepest part of me would know, are you sure? Are you sure? And there's something about in secular humanism is just saying, we can say this is bad, right? This about me needs to be fixed. I need to work on this without referring to some external supernatural belief that has no evidence for it. And it's the honesty for me. It's just pure, rigorous honesty that feels very, very freeing to me.
Yeah, because honestly, I don't buy that most like true believing fundamentalists, et cetera, like whatever your faith or whatever your religion, like I don't buy that they never have doubts or that they like, that they don't read the Bible and they're like, excuse me, like I certainly there are tons of people who take it all very literally and that it's inerrant and such, but like, I don't know. I just really don't, I kind of call BS. Like you're going to condemn queerness, but then you're going to wear mixed cloth fabric. And I don't know, like
right.
at what you're going to claim that all sins are equal and that they're all forgivable, but then you don't, I don't know. I guess like to me, I keep trying to think of this as there's so much that my brain is so curious about now that I've really let myself remember a lot more from my childhood and really let myself dive into it and audit it and reflect on it and all of that. I could just spend multiple lifetimes just going into like a cave of wonders and being like, oh my gosh, look at all of this. You know, this is fascinating. It's like, you know, harmful and dangerous and painful, but fascinating.
Yeah.
And I saw something within the last few months about stop trying to smell the number 9. Like, you know, don't try to do things if you're just, you know, you're going to hit a wall. Like I have to tell myself sometimes like, all right, I'm smelling the number 9. I got to call it. Like,
yeah,
I got to be done with this. I could think about this all day. And I've, you know, YOLO, you only have one life because that's being honest, you know,
yes,
and humble about what we do and don't know. And
yeah.
try to reprioritize and get my head out of that.
So in the email you sent me, you mentioned that you're a little disengaged from your family these days. Do you want to talk about why that is and how that's come about?
Yeah, that's an important part of the story too. So I mean, I'm the only ex-evangelical in my family. I'm the only queer person in my immediate family. So there's some elements there.
Okay.
As far as just sort of divides or tensions, chronic divides or tensions there.
Sure.
Layered with some, you know, history of different family abuses and trauma that was, you know, for another podcast, another time. But yeah, I mean, so just want to acknowledge that it's complex and everyone involved, you know, are complex human beings and deserve love and empathy and encouragement and healing and all these wonderful things. I think everyone deserves that.
Right. Right.
But yeah, so at this point, through my sort of deconstruction, healing, growth in the last couple years have really been intentional about having hard conversations.
Mm-hmm.
I disengaged from my parents about a year ago after a decently long process of having conversations, trying to sort of have like an eye-to-eye review, like sort of an honesty contest that you talk about in some other ways. And I eventually reached a point where I realized I just needed to know, you know, if they still held anti-queer views.
Okay.
And reached a part and I asked them that and they said yes. And in other words, but you know, the synthesized message was yes.
Sure.
And it was honest, you know, and I certainly appreciated that honesty because that honesty gave me clarity to then allow me to begin moving some other gears that I then needed to start moving and get going. And you know, that impacted me and left me with homework for things to deal with and decisions to make. And I did decide with my parents that I just, for various reasons and kind of a heavy family history included with a lot of this religious trauma and anti-queer religious trauma and stuff.
Yeah.
That just not enough had changed. And the boundaries I needed to be able to be safe and not just survive, but even begin to think of thriving were just not possible to reconcile.
Right.
In relationship with my parents, the worlds don't reconcile, or they did not reconcile at that time, at least.
At the risk of oversimplifying the comparison here, if you're familiar with my story, my mom was a drug addict, alcoholic, and she was sober for 10 years or so, and then she wasn't. And so in my adulthood, when I got married and had kids, she was still a part of my life, but it was very, very tense.
Yeah.
I was constantly having to set up boundaries. I was constantly, I think there were some mental health issues there as well beyond. So on top of
there always are
addiction. Yeah, exactly. I can feel as you're describing it, how much you care for your parents, but in order for your own health to keep that boundary up. And I get that is all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I feel that empathy, and I see the Venn diagram of our experiences and how you can tap into empathy and feel that too. And I appreciate that. I have experienced some hard things.
Yeah.
I experienced many great and joyous things too. But yeah, I mean, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, it's still kind of raw for me. I mean, I'm feeling some things just now and thinking and talking about it,
Yeah.
And I must say, to acknowledge my dad actually passed away.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I appreciate that. Yeah, he actually passed away earlier this year it was an unexpected car crash.
Oh my. Okay.
Last December was when I had made the decision to disengage and let them know that. And then this past 4th of July is when he died. So it was all like very much so on the coattails of the heaviest, biggest thing of my life, and especially with my parents. And just want to acknowledge that in this story, as it continues.
And again, I don't want to keep stretching this, but I lost my mom about a year after I acknowledged that I no longer believed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a feeling of, was I responsible for this in some way? Is it something? And you aren't, right? We don't have that much. We don't have that much power. And our parents made choices and what have you. So.
Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I love my dad. I wish we could have had a different story. I wish it could have had a different ending. I mean, I deeply feel that. His death impacted me. Yeah. But for me, I had pre-grieved, the relationship, the loss of it.
Right.
In many ways, I had my entire lifetime I've been doing that.
Yeah.
But yeah, especially with the decision to disengage, like I knew that it was possible that, we don't know when we will die, and we don't know what life has in store for us. I knew that going into disengaging with them. And then for me, it just turned out that 7 months later, it was not a drill.
Yeah. So sorry.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And for anyone who has experienced this, like, may you find your deep healing and peace and calm, and may you let yourself feel the feelings, because as you're able to let yourself feel the feelings and give it space and let it wash into and then out of you, that I have found and have heard from others that the grieving and the healing can go smoother and such with that. So yeah, empathy to everyone experiencing losses and grief.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my mom and I are sort of in a space where we're communicating some stuff, and I'm in a place where maybe that's the most I can say about that right now.
That's perfectly fine.
I want to talk more, but it's so raw and it's so like current that I don't. Yeah, maybe another time, maybe.
Yeah, again, I'm sorry if I'm pushing.
Oh no. I'm just sort of, sort of feeling in the moment that I'm realizing I got to set that boundary for this conversation, but.
You mentioned the term evangelical.
Yeah.
There is quite the thriving community out there.
Oh yeah. There's t-shirts and bumper stickers and everything.
Exactly. So what exactly, how do you participate in that personally? What does that identification mean for you?
So I follow like evangelical related hashtags and stuff for posts, because I think that's an important part of self-care and healing. It has been for me.
Yeah.
And I think there's seasons with that. And there may be times when you need it more and then you won't need it and might need it again. And
yeah,
I mean, I follow like social media, follow the Religious Trauma Institute and Brian Peck and Laura Anderson and Sandria Hall and Anthony
They're all amazing.
All these people. Yeah. Sasha, Sagan. And I also follow Facebook. I'm a part of a group, or I follow a group that is just like an online community of evangelical people. And I encourage anyone, if like that feels funny to you, like push your boundaries a smidge with that, because I was one of those people. And I was sort of like, I feel a little bit funny about joining an online community, but it has been like such a net benefit for me. And I'm not a very active member, contributing, like putting out a lot of posts or what have you, but just seeing the stories, just so much, it's so validating.
Yeah.
And so much of this experience when we haven't been able to talk about stuff, because that is such a part of the repressive nature of a lot of these theologies and these communities, it's just so great to be able to hear and see people's stories and to laugh and cry and cuss and smile. And
you don't have to explain yourself to.
And it's nice to be able to not have to prime a lot of people with like 10 hours worth of back history so that they can understand why this thing is somehow like a big deal or a fun thing or very infuriating, but
yeah. So I think one of the hardest parts of deconstruction, deconversion is finding that community, finding somewhere that you still have a sense of belonging, that these are my
Yeah.
people.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's so many people that are in that situation, right? That, what is it, like a quarter of millennials who were raised in religion are not going back, and those numbers are only increasing. And
yeah,
so there's just more and more people without that sort of church home environment. I remember my mom a few years back now, she expressed to me that one of the things that was just the greatest concern for her with me not being a Christian or what have you is that I don't have a church home.
mm-hmm.
And I think really what she was, I think on a deep human, parental level concerned about is just like, Troy, like, where's your community? This
Right.
is because if how you get community historically, traditionally, if you've been raised in that environment, is through your church, through your faith, through your beliefs, then what happens when you don't have that? And so I think there's a huge need for that.
Yeah.
Part of me wants to level up Super Saiyan in the moment and be ready to take on creating a local chapter of the Humanist Association to sort of have these spaces in these communities. I think that people are creating these in very amazing and surprising and clever and fun ways.
Yeah.
And I think that we have a huge deficit. There's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely.
I think that humanism and humanists, this is a huge area where, there's a huge opportunity.
I totally agree. I think there's a couple of things. One is the word humanism itself really conjures up men in tweed jackets at Oxford.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do is make humanism, put the humanity in humanism, right?
Yeah.
Something living and breathing and on the ground, right?
Yeah.
And so half of the battle is PR.
Oh, yeah.
When somebody goes through the deconstruction process, they may have, just as they have a reaction to the word atheist, they may have a reaction to the word humanist, and they ignore that.
Sound a little bit woo.
Yeah. Or just the secular part of it has been off limits.
Or that
and
too,
yet,
yeah.
And yet there's all this, the joy of humanity there that I think people miss. We just need better PR. We need people like you, Troy.
Well, if anybody wants to help me get a job in that, I would do it. Yeah, I mean, so for example, my personal motto that I've created over the years is do no harm, but take no shit and work for peace and justice.
Okay.
And I see, for me, that's humanism. It's setting boundaries, it's standing up for ourselves and each other, and it's proactively listening and working collaboratively and collectively to promote peace and understanding that accountability and justice is the only way we get there.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is humanism to me. I mean, and then I think the agenda of humanism, or my agenda, because I would say I'm a progressive humanist if I want to use a longer phrase.
Sure.
Humanist for short, but progressive humanist, if in these circles, because I want to see as many people as possible experience as much joy and warmth and safety as possible as soon as possible. To me,
Absolutely.
that's my humanism. That's my beliefs. Those are my morals. I see, when I look at the 10 commitments of humanism, I see all of that there. It's in big shining, letters. To me, it's just a beautiful marquee of okay, here we go. This is it.
Yeah. I had a guest on recently named Colin, and he said his first and only religion was inclusion. And I thought he had this really beautiful way of saying it. And he said, I need you to know you're in my circle.
I like that.
I just thought that was really beautiful. That I'm including you. You're in my circle. I've got you. I've got your back. So I just love the way he said that.
Yeah.
You have said that you believe in the possibility of transformation and the importance of justice. Do you want to expand on that?
Sure. I mean, I have lived experiences, just heard so many people's stories, and as far as the ability of human beings to transform, I don't want to say that absolutely every single human being can and will transform, especially in the specific context of transform from maybe a more harmful mindset or behavior to a, less harmful, more peaceful, inclusive, sort of. I don't think that every single person is going to do that necessarily. I do think that we need to encourage that, and that at some point we have to figure out what it means to say no or to challenge harmful ideas. The sort of
Right.
like, the paradox of tolerance.
Right.
At some point we just, it's not necessarily fun, and it, from a human being and an empathetic level, it's not really fun to say no to people and to say like your beliefs are causing harm,
Right.
or like your action is immoral. And yet, like, are we allies to vulnerable groups, marginalized populations, and just generally, are we being moral if we don't say no to some things? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being very rhetorical. We must say no to several things. And so I think that is a part of humanism I want to see.
Yeah.
I want to see humanism actively showing us, kind of like you're saying with Colin on your recent interview that you posted, that, I want to see humanism very actively showing lots of different people and populations and communities, like, y'all matter. You
Right.
are very valuable and important. We see you. These are the specific things we're doing to address the harm and the trauma and violence that we see and hear y'all are experiencing. And we are going to do whatever we can as quickly as we can to be a part of that. We are going to be allies. And not only that, we will be accomplices. We are going to be in it with you,
Yeah.
listening to you and trusting you. We are with you. We need to see more, I don't know, boots on the ground, but I don't want like an aggressive militaristic metaphor, but
Yeah.
I want to see more like hearts in the streets, like
Right.
willing to be vulnerable and be compassionate and be scared and try to lead with that sort of like deep, like the heart of humanism. Yeah, I want to see a humanism with a lot of heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
With a lot of love, with a lot of showing up, with a lot of putting your genuine care for others and ourselves and all the life on this planet into how you vote, and
Yes.
into what ideas and what leaders and what movements you promote and participate in. And I think that there are better and worse sides, and I think that there are better and worse mentalities and ideas. And I think that as much as it sucks on some level, we must say no to some specific things. Because who are we if we don't do that?
Yeah.
How are we ever going to get past it and deal with it if we don't start setting some boundaries? Because we have to set boundaries to protect ourselves and to protect humanity. I mean,
Right.
I think that's important. So that's another part of what I would say my humanism, my identity within that is, we got to challenge some stuff. We got to disrupt some stuff. We need to do it keeping everyone's humanity and possibilities in mind, but we must do it. And we got to figure out a way to do it with love and courage and empathy. I love Brene Brown. I think, weaving her in, with religious trauma, with deconstruction, with a deep commitment and awareness to human struggling. Beautiful possibilities, beautiful possibilities.
Yes.
So one other idea that I'm kind of wanting to push, because I think it's a really important move for humanism and for, I don't know, the American Humanist Association and various groups. I loved seeing the Humanists for Biden.
Yeah.
I loved seeing like an active, involved presence, because if all the churches and all of the other groups are going to be endorsing and supporting candidates, then by God, so sweet. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm being facetious a little bit, but I mean, that floored me with deep hope and
Yeah.
and that moved me deeply. I was like, oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, and let's plug Sarah Levin, who was running that. So she's done just amazingly good work.
Yes, her consulting business. Yeah, amazing work there. And yeah, so I love seeing that. And I'd love to see some sort of I don't know if they have to be unaffiliated directly with the AHA or something, but like an endorsement board. I know like we have various groups in Washington State. There's like the Stranger Election Endorsement Board or something, a local alternative paper. There's like the Washington Voter Progressive Guide. There's like various things that are involved in paying attention, because I think part of putting that commitment to social justice and peace into action is, being responsible and being involved and listening and putting that empathy into action, how you vote and stuff. So I want to see that. I think it's happening anyway, but I want to see that continue to bloom. I want to see that super bloom. Let's
Right.
blow it up. But one other idea that I really have that I would love to see happen is for at every single religious or interfaith conference or convention for there to be a panel of religious trauma survivors,
Mm,
especially that are there from the faith groups represented at that conference. I think that I dare and I like deeply ask and hope that, you know, these faith leaders would want to have these voices participate in these conferences and conventions to really deeply show like, yes, we religious leaders, we religious communities, we hear you. We're not going to have a blind eye to this. We're not going to pretend. We're not going to dismiss. We're not going to dehumanize. What do we need to do to keep people in our pews?
mm,
Because I know that they're hemorrhaging people. I
yeah.
mean, the data is out there. Like, and I'm not trying to be aggressive towards religion, but I mean, I think it needs to be honest. These communities, religious communities and leaders need to show empathy. They need to show like, we're not going to prioritize our ego and our public image. We're going to prioritize humans.
Yeah.
We claim to deeply care about humans, people, humanity, life. Let's show that by like having this important conversation. Anyway, so yeah, that's another idea. I would love that to happen. I think if that happens, we can clean up all the harm in religion and then figure out what life can look like on the other side of that. And I think it will look very gorgeous and deeper and beautiful. And I hope to see some of that before I die, honestly.
Well, me too.
Yeah.
Are there other resources, other books, communities that you would recommend for people who are kind of in the middle of this process?
Let's see. So, I mean, again, the Religious Trauma Institute, so much love for everybody that's being a part of that.
Yeah.
And it's so fresh. All of this is so fresh and it's just building up in real time at a very rapid exponential pace, it feels like. I don't know if you feel that way. I feel that way. Like every day I feel like the conversation is exponentially richer and more complex and
Yeah. And like I say, they are kind of inventing as they go this idea of trauma-informed therapy for religious trauma itself specifically. And it's amazing, It's amazing to watch what they're doing and just highly recommend reaching out if.
Well, and so brilliant too. I mean, I think connecting that with like the adverse childhood experiences as they're doing with the adverse religious experiences, we're only learning and like adding on to this complexity of understanding, again, a sort of greater Me Too around like harm that humans and groups of humans have been experiencing.
Right.
So yeah, the Religious Trauma Institute, Laura Anderson, Brian Peck, I mean, your podcast and Humanize Me. And
yes,
I'm very excited. My husband and I listened to your interview with Sasha Sagan a couple nights ago, like ahead of me doing this. And holy cow, it is so much fun to hear that conversation.
Sasha is an extraordinary person, just
so
and just brilliant and down to earth.
And so she like it simultaneously, Sasha, if you're hearing this, much respect. Yeah, just like a such a depth and levity and kind but deep heartedness. I just I want more and more humanists like her.
Yes,
waving the banner and showing people like, come over here, y'all. This is great.
And let's do a plug for her book.
Oh yeah,
for small creatures such as we.
Yes. So yeah, my husband and I, we are buying copies of that, and I want to do like a book club group reading of that with people, because I think, you know, part of where I see myself and other people in humanism also needing to go, maybe not a Jehovah's Witness level showing up everywhere with like tracts to pass out, but like I think we need to be pretty like seen and visible and involved as humanists, you know?
Yeah.
And so, wanting to be intentional about amplifying these ideas and inviting others to participate. I mean, there's like a million amazing people on Instagram right now. Yeah, there's like too many, and I don't want to start name dropping for fear of leaving people out. I mean, and I've listened to your show, like these people are regularly mentioned and stuff.
How about yourself? How can people find you if they wanted to be in conversation with you?
So I Instagram is a good way. Troy Moorhart. Come say hey. And also, one of the ways that I'm trying to put my commitment to humanism into practice is I'm in the process of applying to become a humanist celebrant.
Oh, excellent.
So if anybody's in the greater Seattle Pacific Northwest region and you need a person to officiate your ceremony, I love, and I would love to work with you to help you on your special day. And
Oh, that is so awesome. If you have anytime you want to promote that, let me know, and I'll
oh yeah,
push that out on my social media as well. So
okay. I'm working on some ideas for how to go about that, to maybe brand it and market it and some stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, Troy Moorhart on Instagram.
Well, Troy, I really appreciate you coming on the show, and I think there's just a joy and enthusiasm for humanity in you that you are
Awesome.
expressing, and I think that's going to be infectious. I think people are going to really love this episode.
Well, I'm excited for it. This is such an opportunity for an individual, myself, to tell my story, but to join the chorus of all sorts of folks, yourself included, who are sharing our stories and doing so with courage and vulnerability and a lot of hope for change and greater peace and joy and justice. And yeah, this is just amazing. I love it so much. Thank you for letting me be a part of this.
You're very, very welcome. Final thoughts on the episode. Well, as you can hear, if you will allow me the phrase, I think Troy is a kindred spirit. We are both focused on loving people and seeing the humanity and the autonomy in each human being in our lives. You can also hear where Troy was teaching me. It was important for me to hear about the righteousness of that anger and needing that anger to set up boundaries. I am always learning. I can always be a better ally, and Troy has helped me to do that in this conversation. I commend Troy. I love the work that he is doing. Some of the things that just leapt out at me was him talking about there near the end about a genuine pluralism, and that we have not yet arrived to be able to accept one another in all of the vast diversity amongst humanity. I also love that he was focused on what we do believe in, that humanism is a positive affirmation and not just a negative one. I loved the conversation about a living, breathing, boots on the ground humanism. And I think Troy represents that so very, very well. I also want to just highlight here some of the projects that Troy was concerned with. The Trevor Project for the LGBTQ community. If you are in the process of coming out and need someone to talk to, the Trevor Project is there for you. I will have links in the show notes there. We discussed the Religious Trauma Institute with Brian Peck and Laura Anderson. Troy also mentions the Reclamation Collective, which is a similar secular therapy group that is focused on trauma-informed therapy that is in the subject matter of religious trauma. And he also mentioned the American Humanist Association. I really am hopeful that Troy gets his celebrant certification and is able to do the marrying. I think that'll just be amazing. And then lastly, the one that he really wanted me to talk about the most is the Y'all Means All project. You can take the Y'all Means All pledge and join their mission to protect and advance the rights, dignity, and freedom of LGBTQ community and to remove barriers to equality. I want to thank Troy for being on the program, for sharing his story with such depth and emotion and trusting me to have this conversation, and as well as his strength to set up boundaries where he needed to do so. That was so very impressive. Thank you so much for being a secular humanist that we can all look up to. Troy also has a project in the works that will be in the mold of what we have discussed here today, something boots on the ground, something that touches actual people's lives. It is too early in the stage to announce the details here, but he wanted me to let you know, and I will have Troy back on the show, and I will be promoting that when it is, in fact, ready. We have a number of exciting shows coming up, including Leah from the Women Beyond Faith podcast. We have CG, who is from Nigeria in the United States for his graduate work, who went through a deconversion process while he was in the United States. We have Brian Blaze, who is going to talk about how the Bayes' theorem applies to philosophy, theology, and apologetics, and how it's misused. He has written a book called The Measure of Faith, which is very good. I recommend that. We'll be chatting about that soon. Until then, my name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. Time for the footnotes. The beat is called Waves from Mackay Beats. Links will be in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can promote it on your social media. You can subscribe to it in your favorite podcast application, and you can rate and review it on podchaser.com. You can also support the podcast by clicking on the affiliate links for books on gracefulatheist.com. If you have podcast production experience and you would like to participate with the podcast, please get in touch with me. Have you gone through a faith transition and do you need to tell your story? Reach out. If you are a creator or work in the deconstruction, deconversion, or secular humanism spaces and would like to be on the podcast, just ask. If you'd like to financially support the podcast, there's links in the show notes. To find me, you can Google Graceful Atheist, you can Google deconversion, you can Google secular grace, you can send me an email, gracefulatheist@gmail.com, or you can check out the website, gracefulatheist.com. My name is David, and I am trying to be the graceful atheist. Join me and be graceful human beings. This has been the Graceful Atheist Podcast.